Business has not only a rational part, business has a huge part, emotional part. I think you cannot run a multinational company if you have not been multiculturally exposed. Internal growth has been for me the barometer of the internal strengths of my management and my teams.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Learning from Leaders series. Peter, great to see you. And today we have the privilege to have Mr. Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, the Chairman Emeritus, former Chairman and CEO of Nestlé. Thank you very much, Mr. Brabeck, to join us today. I'll leave the introduction to Peter Van Am. The floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luc. It's a real pleasure to be again with you for the last time, I'm afraid, this year. But we can end the year on a high note. A real impressive guest, Mr., as you say, Brabeck-Letmathe. I'm glad also that I can address him as Peter, which is also my name. So that's a nice little note. Of course, Peter is, as you say, the Chairman Emeritus of Nestlé, the largest food or fast-moving consumer goods company in the world. We know it from all kinds of brands, including, for those of you who drink coffee, Nespresso, but it's incredible. All the other brands that are part of it, Buitoni is one of them that I also like, and so many more. But Peter is also a very versatile man. We'll hear about that. And I want to just point out, he's written his own biography. It's called Ascension. It's available already in French, and also I understand this week it will appear in Spanish, which is wonderful. We'll talk in English today, Peter, if that's okay with you. We could, I think, speak a number of various languages with you. But thank you so much for joining us. And we always start by asking our guests in these pandemic times, not just how are you, but also where are you joining us from?
Very well, thank you very much. As you can see, I'm in my office like I have been for all the time. Basically, I'm every day, when I'm in Switzerland, I'm every day in my office. And that's where we have our conversation today.
That's excellent. And, you know, that means, I suppose, that you're on the other side of the lake from Luc and I. We're in Geneva. You must be near to Vevey, where Nestlé is based. We understand that, you know, of course, this pandemic has been challenging for everyone. Now the sun is shining and also the pandemic, at least in Europe, is receding. But how have these past 15 months been for you personally?
Well, personally, I would say there were two different phases. The first phase was that I was one of the first infected here in Switzerland. I was brought to hospital at the 26th of February, something like this. So I was
2020.
The first, very early on. I stayed about 17 days in the intensive station, so it was a difficult time, much longer than I had thought. And then afterwards, 3 weeks in a recuperation hospital, so it was a long time. So that was one part of it. And the other part of it was then coming out, recuperating, especially physically. I had lost quite a lot of weight. And then afterwards I started to work again. And that's what we are doing over the last almost more than 12 months.
Yeah, and fortunately, it does seem like we're turning a corner in terms of the pandemic, and we're opening up. At least in many countries of the world. There's of course some places where the pandemic is actually worse than ever, but in Europe at least, we're opening up. I wanted to ask you about the long-term effects you think the COVID pandemic will have, even after it recedes. But maybe I should also ask a double question and say, do you have any long-term effects on your side personally of the pandemic?
Well, about the long-term effects on my side, apparently I don't have them. So that seems to be fine. Now let's talk about which is much more important, the overall pandemic. I think there are a lot of learnings to be done. I think it is absolutely stunning how a small and a relatively mild and benign virus has been able to have blocked the whole world. I mean, it has demonstrated a social and an economic vulnerability that nobody had believed. I remember very well in 2015 in Davos, we had discussed the danger and the risk of a pandemic, and we have publicly announced that the pandemic would be coming. But frankly speaking, nobody was really worried about, because although we knew it was coming, we couldn't date it. And this is one of the things which I have learned, is that it's not because you cannot date when it is happening that you shouldn't take the measures for what might come. And I think this pandemic has been the biggest ever man-made disaster that has been created. Just to give you an idea, I mean, according to Lawrence Summers,
Lawrence Summers, of course, the former president of Harvard University, former Treasury of the United States, and former banker, so a very prominent economist and banker in the US.
Yeah, so a very reliable source, I would say, and also a permanent member of our Davos sessions. And Lawrence, he has calculated that the pandemic will cost the United States alone, only the US, 18 trillion of dollars.
That's to put that into perspective, that's about the size actually of US GDP, which is about the same.
It's about 75% of the size of the US GDP. So I mean, it's enormous. It's absolutely enormous.
And when you say man-made disaster, of course, just to be clear, you're referring to the fact, the reaction to the pandemic being the disaster, of course, in terms of all the lockdowns, etc.
Yeah, I think what clearly is coming out, that because what I said before, all experts have underestimated what damage such a small virus can make. But on the other hand, also, the politicians just didn't take it seriously. I mean, when I was joining the hospital, I looked in the evening at television, and I saw the French. From here, we look French television sometimes. I saw the French politicians laughing.
This is, of course, early March 2020. We almost forget this. But at that time, we hadn't even locked down yet. No, and in fact,
nobody was talking about the lockdown, and the politicians were laughing and saying, no, this is just another small virus, a grippe or something like this, a flu or something like this. I mean, we were completely unprepared. And one of the things, and it's not only applying, of course, to the pandemic, but in general also in our private life. I mean, prevention and reaction and adaptation are intimately linked. And the less prepared you are for a disaster beforehand, the costlier will be afterwards the reaction and the adaptation.
Yeah. Now, of course, you say that, and we are seeing the virus or the pandemic recede, but of course, we've seen that twice before. So this is not just a historical lesson that you're giving. This is also a forward-looking lesson, because there's more to come. What do you think are the takeaways that we should take out of this going forward in managing the pandemic and in managing the economy and societal life?
Well, I would say certain governments and countries and politicians have, I think, taken part of the learning, no doubt about it. If I talk about the country that has been perhaps very well prepared, was Israel. I mean, they were able to vaccine their people in a record time. And the interesting thing is the first one who already have been buying the full amount of the booster vaccine that we will need at the beginning of next year.
Yeah.
And I must say, I was positively surprised this time also from the Swiss one, because last year, when the Swiss government was being offered to acquire the vaccine, they said no, we don't yet know, the risk is too high to buy yours. We are believing AstraZeneca is going to be better, and I don't know what, and so on. So they didn't do. So that's the reason why they were not prepared when the vaccine was available to vaccine rapidly the whole population.
Yeah.
Now for the first
They've
time.
already ordered.
Now they have bought 10 million doses for the beginning of next year. So they took some learning out of this. But if you think about, I mean, if we had been prepared like we are today, we could have avoided the lockdowns last year 100%. 100%. Okay. But we couldn't do it because we didn't have masks. As we didn't have masks, we were saying to everybody, no, mask is bad, you don't need mask, it's even worse and things like this. Just because we weren't prepared, we didn't have one. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is one of, I think, the learning is for companies, for governments, it is better you invest in prevention. It will be cheaper. Even if you don't know exactly when this thing is going to happen, then afterwards you have to confront through reaction or through adaptation to the new situation.
Yeah, and that of course means building up a buffer, also financial buffer, but also a stockpile buffer. Practices what virologists would call non-pharmacological interventions (NPI). You're referring to the masks. I assume you're also referring to, for example, social distancing and other measures that allow us to live with the virus in a way, to live with this risk, but in a responsible way.
Yeah, I think there is no doubt that this virus is not going away. From a pandemic, it's going to become an endemic situation.
Endemic meaning it will be like the flu, not in terms of its impact, but in the sense that it always circulates.
Yeah. It will come back, it will go, it will come back, it will go. It will be stronger, it will be less stronger, depending on the year. So we have to live with it. We have to be prepared to this. Most probably, there will be a vaccine, a combined vaccine, I would say in 2023 at the latest, which will be the flu vaccine together with the coronavirus vaccine. So that in this respect, I think, we are working already from a technological point of view in order to find solutions and to be able to live with the virus and not believing one day the virus is away and we can forget about it. We will not be able to forget about it. I think that's quite clear.
Yeah.
But what I have said is two things, perhaps. First of all, it was a very mild virus. I mean, if you look at the mortality rate, it is extremely low. It is somewhere between 0.003, maximum 0.06. I mean, if you take other viruses which are existing today, they have a mortality rate from 40%. Ebola is 40%, okay? So, I mean, you can imagine if we hadn't had such a mild virus, the impact that this would have had. This would have been absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So let's get better prepared for this. The second thing is that we are all talking a lot about the economic impact. I'm not so much worried about the economic impact, okay? Because economies are very resilient. What I'm much more worried about is, first of all, the social impact, which it had, and it has. And I think this is something that we are going to live for quite a lot of time. I mean, one of the biggest social impact is of course, the empowering of the state, which has taken over one of the basic liberties that we had, or one of the basic values that we have had always in a democracy, which was liberty. I mean, we have given up a big chunk of our liberty.
Yeah.
And which is quite outstanding.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that society is now being influenced by two factors which are very negative ones. The first one is fear. I mean, the fear effect of last year, in March, April, May, the first part, until then in summer it went a little bit away, but the fear effect was absolutely impressive. And in the second part, when they were seeing how badly politicians are managing this pandemic, it came anger, big anger. And this you see today already in the demonstrations on the roads, you know, the confrontations with the state power, of course, with the police. And this is something which has definitely changed the society and the way how we are living together and the role that we have between the population and the government. This has deteriorated in an extremely important manner.
Yeah, and I find this fascinating, Peter, because you say this, and it's like you're able to compartmentalize, your personal experience. You talk about the mortality rate being very low, and at the same time, of course, having had the personal experience of having really been struck by this virus. I want to make a little bit of a connection to your past also, because we want to understand also where your management and leadership principles come from. For those of you that haven't yet read your book yet, you were actually born during the Second World War. You've had the experience, of course, in your childhood of Reconstruction at a very special moment in time. And then when you were young, you were really looking always for adventure, and even at some point get very close, I think, to actually experiencing death on one of your adventures in the mountains. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and does that indeed sort of play into your ability to sort of compartmentalize personal experience and then sort of the rational societal perspective on things?
Yeah, I think the experience after Second World War and in the city where I was born and which was totally bombarded, I mean, there was not almost one building standing straight up, has taught me two things. The first one is that the economic recovery, like with the pandemic, is the easiest one to manage. It's the one that is coming almost naturally. And you can see this also nowadays. I mean, if you look at the economy, frankly speaking, has been extremely resilient. It is a societal impact which is bigger one, and the biggest one we have not yet discussed, even about the pandemic, is the individual one. Because I mentioned the pandemic, the impact on society, okay? But think now about the impact on the individual. This has been the biggest impact. And this impact is not going to go away very soon. When we were after the war, the economy, frankly, started to rebuild itself very rapidly. But what happened? Many of my friends, their father either had died, so they were basically only with a mother, or their father had been hurted and he didn't have a leg or he didn't have a hand and things like this. I mean, we were full of invalid people, okay? Or they were still until 1955, which is 11 years. I was 11 years old when the last prisoners of war came back from Russia. And you can imagine the impact that this has when you have been 11 years away and then you're coming back on the individuals. That's why so many marriages went broken at this time, because it was absolutely normal. And the trauma, the individual trauma, which is not being discussed about, is the biggest one of all of them.
Also now.
And also now. And again, this part is not being discussed.
Yeah.
You know?
I want to continue to talk about that, Peter, but we're getting in the chat a couple of questions. I think we briefly addressed this already, but for those of you who haven't heard, you referred earlier on to COVID, the pandemic being a man-made disaster, and I prompted you about that, and I said you mean the disaster. Man-made part of it is the reaction to it, the lockdowns, etc., not the virus itself.
No.
Just
absolutely right. Yeah.
I want to.
It is man-made. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I want to continue that conversation, and Peter, I mean, like we've got so much to learn from you, because of that experience, of course, from earlier in your youth, but also your career, and I want to continue about that because you come from rather humble beginnings in your career. In fact, you describe it in your book that you started as an ice cream salesman, literally driving the truck from here to there and selling ice creams. You do believe very much in this individual agency, you said also, and how important that is for people. Does that also come from having made sort of your own path in your career along the way, and have you seen what's possible if you go for it?
Well, I would say, starting on the bottom of the pyramid is a good exercise. Okay. Not only because it's a certain humiliation, okay, but it is something that gives you a better sense of what business is really all about. You see, I know many. I have been the vice chairman of a bank, and which had a huge investment bank, and I know that many students want the first thing, either they want to go to McKinsey or they want to go to an investment bank, and that's where they want to start and the thing like this. Well, I would say I wouldn't go this way, because what you are learning there is what you already have been doing at the university. Okay.
Right.
I mean, it's intellectual work. It is analyzing. It is thing like this. It's making another chart and thing like this. But this is not business. Business has not only a rational part. Business has a huge part, emotional part. And somehow it is good in your career that you also learn the emotional part of it. So there's a nice Chinese proverb which says, if you cannot smile, don't open a shop.
Right.
Okay?
Because it's a human interaction that
it's
creates
the human interaction. If you're a salesman, you have to interact, you have to understand. And I give you, I mean, this is on the level of the shopkeeper, okay? But think about it. Why it has happened after, especially after the last financial crisis, that the central banks have been putting in and pouring in money and money and money and money, hoping that there would be a reaction on the market. And nothing happened. And they got desperate. They said, we have done everything. We have put so much money in. We got into negative interest rates. Why? Because they still looked at the mechanics of the market. They didn't look at the emotional part of the market. And the market is as sensitive for the emotional part as it is for the mechanical part. Yeah. So in your career, to have once the opportunity to also learn the emotional part of the market, I think this is worthwhile to go through this experience.
Yeah, and of course you had that experience from very early on. I mean, we talked about your beginnings as an ice cream salesman, but you also, for example, when you were just a teenager, I think, or just an adolescent, worked in a service station, in a gas station, and serviced people there. And then also when you started your international career, you were very, very keen, you described, to go abroad and to really see the world and get to know people from various parts of the world, because you were working for a multinational. So you wanted to know local markets, local people, local customs. Is that again for that same reason? Let's say you believe in human interaction and behavioral, if you will, economics and business practices?
Yeah, I think you cannot run a multinational company if you have not been multiculturally exposed, because the consumer is local. The business can be global, but the consumer will always be local. And I remember early on, I mean, when I was still in charge of marketing communication and so on, I told to my people, I said, why don't you ask your mother once what she thinks, if she's a global consumer, or what is her priorities? And you will see she's very local. So you have to treat every consumer like it was your mother. It has to have the same respect. So if she is not a global, you know, we had this idea about, this was in the 80s, the financial analysts were talking about the global brands, the only one that would be surviving. I said, forget about it. I mean, the local brands which have an emotional relationship, I mean, don't forget, the brand is nothing else but the bundle of emotional and functional relations. Right. Most people think about the functional one. I think very few people think about the emotional one. Okay, so it always comes back to this holistic view on a brand, on a company, on a society.
That's right. And you talking about the let's say the functional element of brands, you also say, you cannot overestimate your brand value. In your book, you describe a customer will really not even walk 50 meters extra just to get your product if it can get a similar product nearby. And therefore, you say you have to provide your products wherever, whenever, and however. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's this is now, I learned it specifically from the ice cream business. As you know, ice cream business is an impulsive business, okay? So you normally, You walk on the promenade, it's warm, and you go with your kids, and they see an ice cream, they want to have this ice cream. And if they see another one, which is 100 meters further away, you will not go the 100 meters. You will be on your hand and say, Papi, I want this ice cream here. Okay? They couldn't care less. It's the importance of the physical presence when you are in an impulsive item business. I personally believe in the fast-moving consumer good company. This is absolutely vital. This gives you an enormous advantage. There was also in the 80s, 90s when the private label came out. And then there was a big discussion. Brands will not have any importance anymore because it's all going to be private label and things like this. I said, wait a moment. Private label is very fine. But I cannot get a private label where I want it. Because I only can get it in the distribution. If I can get it in Migros, it's in Migros.
That's right.
If I go to Coop, I don't get it. But my product I can get everywhere. Okay?
That's right.
So it's an if you use it as an advantage vis-a-vis, for example, private label, it opens you a huge market.
It's something that you describe very well, and of course you have an incredible track record with Nestle that has so many, I think thousands probably, right? Local brands all over the world.
Over 2,000, yes.
2,000. Then again, there is also a counterexample, not just from outside Nestle, but even from inside Nestle, and of course that's Nespresso, which is a brand that's global. And that's only available in official Nespresso shops and online. So how do those fundamental insights that you just shared, how do they sort of complement the reality of Nespresso, a product that you also launched and invested in?
Well, as I mentioned before, the whenever, wherever, and however is for me the golden rule for a fast-moving consumer good. Nespresso is not a fast-moving consumer good company. Nespresso is a luxury brand. It's a luxury beverage brand. And luxury brands are characterized by their limited availability. Okay? That makes a difference between a Hennessy and Maurice and the Hermes. Okay, one I get everywhere, and the other one I have to go to a Hermes shop in order to get it. And for me, it was absolutely critical for the success of Nespresso not to be available everywhere, not to be in supermarkets.
Because it's a luxury good.
Because it is a luxury good, okay? Because it's very simple. You bring your products into a distribution, the channel distribution chain. What they are going to do with it? They are going to make promotions on it. You are going to lose the control over price. And this is the end of any luxury product.
Right.
Okay? You can only keep the price. You have to be able to control the price basically everywhere. If you're buying a Cartier watch, it doesn't matter whether you buy it in Geneva, you buy it in Singapore at the airport, or you buy it even in China, you will have more or less the same price. Okay? That's also the reason why Nespresso, every single capsule, is produced in Switzerland.
That's right.
Okay? And then shipped because we have full control of the quality, of the distribution, and the price.
Yeah.
It's a luxury product.
It's fascinating how you're able to distinguish, because if I think of a luxury brand, I will think of a watch, but I won't think of an 80-cent cup of coffee, which is in the end what Nespresso also is, next to being a luxury brand. So it's what's genius, I think, is the fact that you can distinguish something that's 80 cents. The price point is not what determines the luxury aspect of something. It is about the brand. It is about the offering, etc. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to compare. Of course, for you, 80 cents is not a luxury. But before we had Nespresso, or if you look at the other coffee part, roast and ground coffee or instant coffee, we are fighting about prices between 4 centimes for a cup of coffee and 5 centimes and things like this. Suddenly comes somebody and says, forget about this thing. No, it is 50 centimes. It's 10 times the price. Well, then you become a luxury in your category.
It's extremely fascinating. And then another perspective that you also shared, because you've purchased, or the company has purchased a couple of brands. You stopped doing that as a rule. Let's say you said I think it's important to have organic growth as opposed to growth through acquisition. And one of the key elements, I think, in this vision is that you say brands can live forever. They just have to make sure that they reinvent themselves often enough. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to your question. The first one is the preference on internal growth over acquisition. To make external growth, I don't need many people. I need a good banker and then a good lawyer.
By
negotiation, I can do. Okay, that's the way I acquired a pet care company, Purina, and it was basically we were 3 people. That's it. Okay. Now with this, I can make portfolio management. I don't need more. I don't need 370,000 people as we were at the highlight of the company. Internal growth has been for me the barometer of the internal strengths of my management and my teams. Okay?
Right.
Because there, the CEO and the executive board cannot make it happen. The one who makes happen internal growth is your people through all the ranks. Okay? And that's why I like the internal growth, because it was like a fever thermometer. Okay? I could see how strong are we. And therefore, I also gave them a target which was challenging, which was about double of what the market was growing. Okay, so it was a challenging target, growth target, and at the same time, to make things more complicated, I also told them, at the same time, I want you to improve the profit margins. Okay, so now you have a target. This one you cannot achieve with a finance guy and a lawyer. For this one, you have to have engaged the whole apparatus, everybody, from the lowest level up to the highest level in order to achieve that. That was the reason for this part.
Right. And then you have this perspective, though, that you say brands can live forever.
Yeah.
That's interesting too.
It is absolutely true. If we respect the brand. You know, a brand, as I said before, is a bundle of functional and emotional factors. A brand has a relationship with its consumers. Consumers' expectations are changing constantly. Okay? The good management of a brand is that this relationship, which exists at a certain point of time, continues to exist all the time. So when the consumer is changing its expectation, the brand has to adapt to it so that the relationship always stays the same. If you can do that, then there is no life cycle for a brand.
Right.
There can be a life cycle for a product, but not for the brand, if you do it well.
It's of course something that nowadays is being put back into question because we're undergoing such structural changes in our economy and society. And I'm not even talking about the pandemic, but rather, for example, about environmental concerns and social concerns. And it has led, for example, in the US to various brands, simply changing their names, which is a fundamental change to a brand, of course. And other brands being heavily criticized for certain practices and being associated with certain practices that the consumers don't like. So how do you factor those changes into the notion that brands can live forever?
Well, I mean, for me, there's only not one brand, but one reason why some brands had to change, which was political correctness. Okay, I mean, if I take Uncle Ben, just comes to my mind. Okay,
the rice brand.
Yeah. Okay, because I think for wrong reason, but that's like society is. I'm not sure I would have changed it, frankly speaking, because I don't think there was anything wrong. that we had an aunt, I don't know what her name was, as a brand. Okay, we have a Gerber baby, okay, which happens to be a lady which I met, by the way, and it was her photo when she was small until she became the logotype of Gerber. Now, because she is a white American lady, do we have now to change the name of this thing? I don't think so. Okay, but I'm sure if the lady would have been a black lady, because of this political correctness stuff, we would have to change the brand. But this is the exception of the rules. Otherwise, there is no reason at all why a brand should be disappear. And as a matter of fact, you have many brands which are hundreds and 150 years old. The problem is, in many cases, that you have these young product managers, as we call them, or brand managers, who are coming into the business, and they want to leave a trace. They want to show that they know something, and then they change around the brand and they play with the brand, and it's not recognizable anymore, and things like this. I've always said to my brand manager, I said, look, think about if a lady or today's same amount of men go to a surgeon in order to have a lifting on the face, what does she or he wants to hear when he comes out of this operation? He wants to hear, you're looking well, you're looking younger, but nobody wants to say, I don't recognize you. So why do you then on my brands acting and changing and doing just because you want to leave your mark on my brand? Forget about it. Okay? That's what I am saying. There you have to be, you are not, as a brand manager, you're much too short on the brand in order to be the brand owner. The brand owner has to take care that this thing stays on for a long period of time.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, of course, because the history of Nestle sort of coincides with the history of, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it really took off, I think, almost 150 years ago now, as the society was industrializing. This was also, though, the first time that we saw the emergence of brands. Previously, that didn't really exist. So your perspective is that was the start point. There was a before and an after. But everything that has existed since then and has been successful, we can sustain it as long as we reinvent it.
Well, take Nestle, exactly a very good example. And it was very interesting because Henri Nestlé, when he was asked, we have the whole documentation, he was asked, why don't you put the Swiss flag on your product as a sign of quality when he started to sell outside of Switzerland? And he said, no, I'm going to put my stamp. I'm going to stay for the quality, and I will be creating a brand which is my brand. And the brand, we have kept it, we have modernized it, we have adapted, we have put it more modern, but it's still there. And it's still that more than 150 years. It's still the sign. I mean, at the time, there were 3 birds in it, okay? And the mother was giving it a worm. So then afterwards, we put it to 2, because why? Because at that time, they had 8 children at home. Now they only have 2, so we put 2. And we take the worm out because they were saying this was also politically not correct, that we were talking to people in Africa, showing them that they have to eat, I don't know what. So there was all this political correctness. But the brand is the same.
The key message, but it stands
for.
The key
message is the same. Okay? Yeah. It's taking care of the family.
And that's what it means, of course. There's also a question from one of the students. So what does that, the slogan, good food, good life means? And that's exactly what that means.
Yeah, that's what it means. Good food, good life.
I want to, Peter, I could talk to you forever. As an individual, I'm super interested. There's so many questions piling in, though, from students. And we also have a couple of students that join us live. So I want to bring in Jeffrey. Jeffrey, who's Lebanese but lives in Barcelona, is doing his master in management there. And Jeffrey, I think you also have a question for Peter.
Mr. Brabeck.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Jeffrey. I'm Lebanese. I'm studying my master's in management at the EU right now, and I want to have your humble opinion on what are the most important skills and values that a young student like myself should focus in order to succeed in the future.
I like your question, Jeffrey, because you were asking about skills and values. You were not asking about what should I know.
Yes, exactly.
And that's, I think, is already a very, very positive. That's why I'm saying I like your question.
I think those are important.
The most important thing are the values which are bringing. Okay. I believe that one of the most important individual values is the openness and the interest and curiosity. Because whatever you have learned from whatever university, whatever MBA you have, in 2-3 years, all of this is gone. Okay? So the most important thing is learn every single day something new. And you will be busy. And there's no end to it. Because every single day things have changed. Okay? So this curiosity, this not being satisfied. I mean, I have seen too many people coming with a Master of Business certificate from whether it was Harvard or it was other business schools, and saying, here I am, and I am. So, your what? Your what was the past was? Who cares what the past was? The only thing I know what was in the past is not going to make you successful in the future. Okay. So they're talking to me more about what do you think? How do you think it will be updated in the future? What is your interest in this future? And it doesn't have to be only on the economic part, because I think that you have to have a grip on the societal part of the situation, of the human part of the situation, as I mentioned before, if you want to do good business. So I think this idea about values first. Another value which I think today is extremely important is tolerance. Okay? Now, if you want to be in a multinational company, especially, you have to be tolerant. Because otherwise, I mean, you will not be able to have a relationship with the local consumers. And tolerance means nothing else, that you are able and willing to look over the frontier of your own society, okay, of your own religion, of what the values of your family. If you look over it and see and learn that out there are many others, and treat them with the same respect that you treat your own. That's for me tolerance. Okay?
Thank you.
Now, there's one thing on tolerance. There's a paroxysm of tolerance. If you are only tolerant, but you are not being treated tolerant, then you can start to create your own negative impact. And this is a problem of our democratic system. We want to be tolerant to minorities. But if these minorities are not tolerant to the majorities and start to run, like we have it in some countries, that the minorities are running and deciding what the majority should be doing, then we have a problem. Okay?
So you have a very clear idea, Peter, about sort of the values that you should carry on in life. I think also maybe something you could recognize is that the values that you have and that have guided you throughout your career, you seem to recognize that those may not be the values of others either. This is a personal perspective on what you've learned throughout your life. How do you deal with that kind of diversity in values? For example, in an executive team, you've worked with so many.
Yeah, I mean, I give you one example. I remember when I came from Latin America to Vivint, I became at the level of executive board. I found once one of my collaborators, who was a Malaysian, I found him in the office and kneeling and praying. Okay, And that was considered almost, let's say, very rare. But I thought, if we want to be tolerant, and we have to be tolerant, we have 55 nationalities in where we're sitting in the head office. We have to give to those people and to everybody the possibility to find a room where they can practice their religious beliefs or whatever. So we created rooms, which I didn't want to call prayer rooms, but they are rooms where everybody can go. One can make meditation, the other one can pray, the other one can whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. We can just read it. You see, this is a sign of tolerance vis-a-vis other religious parts, for example.
Yeah. Okay? It's a very you describe it in your book also that you really like the Swiss society, which I think has a couple of those perspectives that you have personally. I want to bring in another student, Peter, which is Nadine, who is joining us, I think also from Barcelona. But Nadine, you have a rather personal question, and I think it's both about your own background and leadership lessons you'd like to hear from Mr. Brabeck-Letmathe.
Yes, hello, Mr. Brabeck, Peter, and everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the interesting session. It was pretty insightful and enriching, especially when you said regarding the pandemic, prepare for a disaster, and you emphasize on the impact of an individual. Well, just to wrap it, a bit of background about my question. I'm Nadine. I study an MBA specialization in entrepreneurship in Barcelona campus. And my personal background is that I'm a Palestinian Israeli, and I'm worried politically what is happening now in my home country from humanitarian point of view, and also as a transformational, innovative team leader who needs to keep team members aligned on the company vision and mission. And as you mentioned, human-made disasters such as pandemics, we all know that as some other countries are going through voluntarily man-made disasters like war and clashes, and leadership comes here strongly in context. And I would like to hear from your point of view on how do you keep your team motivated despite the moral conflicts within a team, like wars when the team's already lost its dynamics, and how you as a leader, you don't let this moral conflict affect you to lead the company to better performance in the future?
I mean, this is a very delicate question, of course. I would say I have seen some leaders who, although defending their position very strongly, have been able to achieve a certain harmony between different team members. Okay, if you ask me, you were saying Israeli, Palestinian, I would say Shimon Peres was certainly one of them, which I have seen, and I worked with him in the sense that he had asked me at that time to create Nestle Palestine, because he was worried exactly for what is happening now, of course. And he said, Peter, if we do not do something, if we do not create opportunities for our Palestinian neighbors, we will never get an end to this conflict. So why don't you, besides investing in Israel, because we are the biggest food company in Israel, why don't you also invest in Palestine? And I created Nestle Bethlehem for this reason. Okay, it was under his leadership. So there you had the leader who was doing this. Now, I then afterwards created Nestle Syria, okay, which was at the time when George W. Bush declared the axis of evil. If you remember, this was his famous saying. And at that point, excuse me, I decided we are going to Syria, we're going to build a factory, because the people of Syria have the same right as the people of Israel to have good food and to have a healthy life. And we did. And the Americans were trying to boycotting us in the United States. And I said, I'm sorry. We are not servicing governments. We are servicing the people. Okay? And within this, you have the possibility to be a factor of tolerance and to be a factor of bringing those people together. I give you another example, Daniel Birnbaum. okay, with the Western Divan Orchestra, where he has on purpose half Israelis, half Palestinian in his orchestra, and he's traveling the world over. And there is no conflict between the members of the team, because what they are doing and the target they have, which is a common target, is overwhelming what they have as a personal, or could have as a personal conflict. So I don't, what you have to try to achieve is that when you have a team and you have so different people from so different things, they have to put their priority to the mission that you have, and not to the individual priorities which they have as nationals. Okay, that's the only way how you can achieve that.
It's a very thoughtful reaction, and we thank you for it, Peter. I hope, Nadine, that was what you were hoping for. To continue on that, Peter, you of course say this from experience. You mentioned the example of starting Nestle, Bethlehem, okay. And you also, of course, had very other many experiences. For example, in Chile in the 1970s. Where you arrived, Allende, leftist president, was elected president. A couple of years later, overthrown by of course, Pinochet, a military dictatorship. And in between, you met and smoked a cigar, you said, with Fidel Castro. So it's almost inconceivable for some people that you would be able to interact with people that are so diverse in their political views and realities, and yet sort of have a North Star. Is that your North Star, taking care of people? You're about good food, healthy life, and if we can service people, then that's what we're going to do. And that's how you stay apolitical, even though you're in the middle of politics?
I think in my case, I'm completely apolitical. I never belonged to any party. I must even have to say I have never voted in my life, because when I could vote, I was not there, or I was in other countries where I couldn't vote and things like this. So I cannot vote in Switzerland, so I've never voted anyway. So I really apolitical completely. But perhaps this helped me to be accepted by so many different parts of the politicians. I mean, I have been advisor to Sarkozy, I've been advisor to 4 Austrian chancellors, I have been advisor to the president of Venezuela, I've been involved in this. Well, I had the privilege to be also advising, is too much to say, but to give my opinion to the Pope. So I have met a lot of people, different people in the world, and I think because I have only one thing which is in my mind, is how can we help the people? Because that's what is important. Politicians is in principle, if politicians would be acting like what they are supposed to do, they would be acting quite differently, because they are supposed to defend the interest of the people. But most of the time, they are defending their own interest. And it's a fight of power. Who has more power? And they forget completely the people by whom they are elected and for whom they should be fighting.
Accountable. It of course helps that, I suppose, that you've worked for your entire life for a nutrition company, which if there's any industry where everyone can agree that's a human necessity, human need. Of course, it is a food company, whereas perhaps other companies, if they work with certain regimes, or at least under certain regimes, they might be questions if their actions don't inadvertently help others. I want to allow a last question from a student also, because we're coming to the end of our conversation. We wish we could go on forever, really. We're getting so many questions in. Thank you so much. But I want to give the floor now to Halim, who's from Syria but studying in Barcelona. He's MBA.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure having you here today, Mr. Peter. So my name is Halim Suleiman, and I come originally from Syria, Damascus. And my question will be pretty simple, but I'm expecting a very good answer. What do you believe is the biggest responsibility as a CEO? and not only as a CEO, as a leader in a company or in a country or in a team?
What is a responsibility, or
what do you believe is the biggest and the most important responsibility?
Well, I think you wouldn't be surprised if I say the same thing, people first. And I think if you look at how companies have been reacting during the pandemic, I think the big majority was first of all taking care of their own people, which is the right thing to do. It was the first priority in such a crisis. And it doesn't matter. Look in Syria, because you are from Syria, okay? Our factory, which was doing very well, and I was very proud. One night was completely bombarded, okay? 400 people lost their job. Well, the first reaction would have been many people, who bombarded it? Okay? We didn't ask who bombarded it. We don't know, up to now. We don't know who bombarded it, whether it was the government or whether it was the rebels. This was not the question. The question was, what is going to happen to the people who have lost their job? This is what the first question has to be. And what can we do in order to help them? What we did, we maintained the people for more than a year and paid them, okay, in order to help them to find something else. And we had to reduce Nestle Syria to about 70 people. That was where we could assure a long-term thing. But we took care of our people first. So I would say this is what a good CEO is doing. Take care of your people, and when I talk about, first you just talk with your people, second is with the consumer. Think about them, what do they need? How can you help? If you have an earthquake, what do they need? They need water, first thing, okay? Fun enough, so nobody thinks about this, but the first thing they need is water, okay? So help them. It's what you can help, not what you have. So that would be my answer.
It's such an empathic response, and I'm seeing in the chat that so many people respond so positively to that, of course, and some are a bit surprised to hear that, because they think that business is about making profits, making money, growing. And of course, in your career, you have had a lot of criticism that in some cases Nestle was criticized for seemingly putting making money ahead of its public service. How is that compass that you find, that you say, I know what I'm doing here, these are my values, and we're taking care of that?
First of all, never take criticism personal, okay? They are using you because you are the representative, but it's not against you, okay? That's the first learning. It's always against the institution, okay? So don't react as if it was you, because then you're acting wrong. The second one is that you have to be transparent. If you made a mistake, you have to say, okay, yes, we made a mistake, but we will work on it. And by the way, why don't you help me? Why don't you come with me and help me to become better than this in this place? Okay? That's the way how you would handle this thing. But the other thing is, you see, because we were talking, of course, and perhaps I sounded like I was only priorities about the social responsibility of the company. This is not true at all. For me, profit is nothing else but, first of all, the result of my work and my creation of value. But this value has to be shared. That's the reason why I created the concept of creating shared value. Okay? So I am absolutely for the creation of value. This is a fundamental thing. The only thing I'm saying, create value for the shareholder, but create the same amount of value for the society. Because if society doesn't allow you to act, you will not be able to create value for the shareholder either. Okay? Economy is a sub part of society. It's not the part of society.
It's an amazing way to conclude our conversation, Peter. We want to thank you for being with us. We know you have to go because you shared you'll be flying. You're actually you fly yourself, don't you? One of your passions in life. Yeah. So we hope you can continue to summit and wish you a wonderful flight. Thank you for flying with us for this past hour, for being with us and sharing all your wisdom.
Well, thank you, Peter, for the great moderation. I enjoyed it a lot. And to all of you for the questions, of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Peter.
Thank you very much, sir.
And we wish you
have a safe flight.
Rest of the day. Thank you, and over back to Luc.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Mr. Brabeck. Exceptional talk for an hour. A lot of learning for our students. Thank you for that. Have a safe travel. Be careful out there. For all of the viewers, this was the last talk for the season 2. We will be back September for the season 3. I would also like to thank and take this opportunity for all the people that are in the background that are making this show possible. So thank you everybody for this contribution, and looking forward to the start of season 3. Enjoy your time. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All the best.